Ever since the dawn of digital photography, there have been some special cameras that have really stood out. And not just because they're rare and difficult to find, but because they dared to be different, to do something weird and strange. Some of these cameras were trying something new and innovative, and some were pushing the boundaries of what a digital camera could be. And others, well, you'll see. In this video, we'll go over all the rarest, strange digital cameras I've collected over the years, and I've put them in 3 categories: the obscure and weird, past legends, and one of a kind. And we'll start off with something truly obscure and weird, the Polaroid IM1836. This camera was sort of released in 2013, more on that later. And it was made by Polaroid, but not really. It was just licensed by Polaroid and made by this other third-party manufacturer called Sakar International. And that's something that a lot of those big film brands have done before, like Minolta and Kodak. Just sell their naming rights to another person to build crappy cameras and sell them on Amazon. And I said kind of released in 2013, and that's because this camera never officially hit shelves due to a lawsuit with Nikon. The whole dispute was over how the camera was looked and designed, which looks eerily similar to Nikon's J1 or the J series line, one of those cameras. Nikon sued, won that lawsuit, and they pulled them off the shelves, supposedly. You can still find these on eBay. Randomly, they'll pop up. I got this one new in box. But even with all that controversy, that's not even the most interesting part. The camera runs an old version of Android, so you could load different apps to edit your photos and share them with other people right directly on the camera. And then, get this is the craziest part. The sensor for the camera, the digital sensor, was not in the body at all. This little black area when you take off the lens isn't a sensor, it's just plastic. And then there's a connection point to the lens, and if I open up the lens, which I did, the sensor is inside the lens itself. Just the craziest thing, and the controversy on top of that just makes it hilarious. These are really tough to find, but they do pop up every now and then, and because they're kind of a terrible camera, you can get them for around $100. Continuing on the theme of obscure and weird, rare digital cameras, we have this beauty, the Kodak Pixpro S1. Also, like the Polaroid, not actually made by Kodak, it was made by a third party called JK Imaging, which when you learn about this camera, that JK just, it's very ironic. This camera was released in 2014 and must not have sold very well because there's not very many of them out there. And part of that reason might be because most of them I find nowadays are broken. So it seemed to break a lot. The shutter would fail, the mechanical shutter. I have circumvented that by developing my own little manual shutter mechanism on the side of the camera. It's kind of a whole mess, but it does work. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. What makes this camera cool and special is that it is Kodak's only interchangeable mirrorless camera they ever made. So it has a 16 megapixel micro four thirds sensor. It uses the same micro four thirds mount that Panasonic and Olympus and others use, so it's part of that whole system. Kodak did develop a couple of lenses for this camera that are Kodak branded lenses. If you paid a little extra to get it bundled, there was even this extra 400 millimeter lens, which if I remember correctly, you could only buy with the camera, bundled with the camera. It was never sold separately. I got my hands on one at one point, and it is just weird, this big plasticky telephoto lens. And yeah, kind of the funny thing about this camera is while it wasn't made by Kodak, it was actually a worthy attempt. It's a pretty decent camera. It feels good. There's some metal, there's some rubber grip. It's got a tilty screen that goes to the back. It has Wi-Fi capabilities. So spec-wise, it wasn't quite a Panasonic or Olympus killer at the time, but it wasn't a terrible camera. This isn't the only Kodak camera I have on the list today, and people just give Kodak a ton of flack for not succeeding in the digital camera world, but they really did try several things. And this was one of their last-ditch efforts in 2014. Hard to find, especially hard to find working, and if you do, you're paying over $200 usually for one of these. Getting a little bit older now, this is a camera from 1999 that I just picked up, and it is insanely weird. Super cool camera. This is the Minolta EX1500 digital camera system, because it is a whole system. It looks like a Digicam at first, just kind of a normal turn-of-the-century digital camera, except that it has this trick up its sleeve. You can take the lens and sensor module off. So I guess kind of like the Polaroid. There you go. The lens and the sensor are together along with a little tunnel optical viewfinder. And then over here is the camera, body, processor, card reader, battery, screen, everything else. And they did this so you could switch out your lenses, even though it's a Digicam. You could buy optionally an additional lens. So either it was sold with the wide angle or sold with the telephoto lens, and you could swap them, I guess, depending on what you needed for that day, like you would an interchangeable lens camera. but as a digicam. Super weird. But that is not all, because also additionally, if you paid extra money, you could buy this little extension cable. It's not that little actually, which connects a lens module to the camera body. And you could use the lens off of the camera, control with the camera body, and move this wherever you want it. It's a pretty decent cable length too. What problem this was trying to solve, I have no idea, but it is one of the weirdest consumer digital camera setups I've ever seen. Oh yeah, and then to top that off, this doesn't run Android. That's too old for that. But it ran kind of the precursor to that, which was called Digita OS, which was this operating system for cameras that never totally took off. Several brands, HP, Pentax, Kodak, and others put it on their cameras, about 7 or so cameras total. It was a universal operating system for cameras. So hopping between the camera brands, it was the same operating system. And get this, you could share scripts with each other. There were some scripts that you could load on from the companies, but then also you could just write your own scripts and load them and execute them on the cameras to make little programs for them. So cool. And yes, you can also run Doom on it. The camera itself with the telephoto lens module is not rare at all. You can pick those up for about 25 bucks. The wide angle lens is more expensive and harder to find. And then impossible to find is this extension cable. This took me years of searching. I finally found one for sale recently and bought it. Super excited to have it in my collection. Just such a weird thing. Okay, speaking of another one that's extremely difficult to find, this next camera was sold exclusively in Japan. In 1998, Casio released the ZR1. This cute camera has a 0.08 megapixel monochrome sensor. You can see it's designed in that vertical format that we don't really see much anymore from digital cameras, but was kind of a trend for a while. It has a fixed wide angle zoom lens, and then on the front there's a mirror so that you can take selfies, you can see yourself. On the other side of the mirror, it's a two-way mirror, is a little optical viewfinder so you can compose your shots from the back, although I will say it is extremely little and hard to use. This flash up at the top is detachable, comes off, and it matches the color of the camera body. This one is a pink transparent one, which is very difficult to find. They're all difficult to find. I also owned a white one as well. But if that wasn't weird and cool enough yet, the big kicker with this camera is that built inside of it is a little tiny thermal printer, which takes your images and prints them out onto little thermal sticker sheets. Very cool. These are very hard to find, but you can find them if you're patient, especially if you shop on sites specifically for Japan, since it was a Japanese exclusive camera. And I bought both of mine new in box sealed, which was so cool to see all the packaging, from Bai, who also sponsored this video. And Bai works really well for things like this that are sold only in Japan or just harder to find in whatever country you're in. I've been shopping for Bai's for years now before they sponsored me, and I love working with them because it's a great place to find weird old cameras, like the next one we're going to talk about, which I also bought on Bai. There's a couple on here that I bought from Bai actually. Bai works by connecting you to local Japanese only listings in Japan. You can purchase them and then they ship them to Bai's warehouse and then ships to you overseas. This just came from Bai 2 days ago. And yeah, also rare and cool camera. Maybe we'll talk about that in another video. I did have to pay some import charges, but it was still cheaper than picking it up in the US. So just keep track of that. And if you're in another country, you've been dealing with this long before we in the US have had to start dealing with it. Especially if you're looking for rare, weird digital cameras, then check out Bai. Use the link in the description to save 10% off your first purchase. And thank you to Bai for sponsoring this video. Okay, this next camera that I teased, one of the weirdest cameras I've ever found. So excited to have it in my collection. This is the Minolta RD3000. This was released in 1999. And I'm starting to see a theme here. There's a lot of really cool cameras released around that time. There are several things that make this camera very weird and very special. I guess first off, there's not one but two digital sensors inside the camera. These are dual 1.5 megapixel CCD sensors, and the image gets split between both sensors and then stitched together somehow wonderfully inside the camera, so you are none the wiser when you get the image. I actually have another one of these cameras that I bought broken, the first one I got. I made a whole video saga about that. I was able to take it apart and see how it worked on the inside, and it was fascinating how they got the light to both of those image sensors that were actually mounted 90 degrees apart from each other. Super cool. But then that's not the only thing weird and special about this system. It uses the Minolta Vectus lens mount and lens system. If you've never heard of that before, that's because these are APS film cameras that were made, the Minolta Vectus series. APS film, smaller than 35mm film. It actually lasted quite a while, but then died out and they don't make it anymore. But this was the only digital camera to use these lenses, and why they chose to use these lenses rather than their full frame 35mm Minolta A lenses, like they did on another similar camera, the Minolta RD175, beats me. I have no idea. It was such a bizarre camera, such a bizarre decision. The thing looks weird and blocky and chunky and in this like old gray color that's like so 90s. I have almost all the lenses for this system, including the wide angle that was made specifically for this camera, which is very cool, and also the external flash that was made for this camera. Like I mentioned before, I bought this on Buy. They are very difficult to find. They don't come up for sale very often. And then when they do, people want hundreds and hundreds for them, if not over $1,000. That's a lot. I think it is cool, but obviously way more than I would be willing to pay. Thankfully, I got this one for much, much less money. And yeah, just what a crazy cool camera to have in my collection. We're staying in the obscure and weird category for a while because this is my favorite category of cameras anyway, so I have a lot. And this next one is the oldest one on the list. This is the Polaroid PDC 2000. Released in 1996, this was Polaroid's first ever digital camera. And it is weird, and not just that it looks weird. It's kind of a mix between the Star Trek Enterprise or some kind of ship and like a Bop It. Okay, where to even begin? There is actually a really nice optical viewfinder. That's just the like laser blaster looking thing on the spaceship that you look all the way down the tube. This cool gold reflecting thing over here on the side is actually sonar. So this is the only digital camera I'm aware of, this and the follow-up model, that uses sonar for autofocus, which is really cool. That's something that Polaroid engineered before for some of their instant film cameras. Super interesting fact. The camera also does have interchangeable lenses, which is interesting. So 2 lenses were sold for the system, and I do have them both. That was kind of hard to track down. They just sort of screw into the camera and are only front elements for the lenses, because there's actually an element, a rear element, that's always in the camera in there. This earlier PDC 2000 model comes with an internal hard drive, so there's no external media. You can actually hear the hard drive boot up when you turn it on, which is kind of cool, like a spinning disk hard drive, not flash memory. Very interesting. And then yeah, the whole thing looks like a toy, but it was actually meant for professionals. So the base model, the cheapest you could get back in 1996 was $3,000, and it went up for there. Just crazy, absolutely nuts. These are difficult to find. They do pop up every now and then, and they're just more of an oddity. So some people will try to sell them for a lot, but you can get it for 100 or 200 bucks when you finally find them. What a weird camera. Okay, now I wanna move out of the obscure and weird camera category and talk about rare cameras that are legends. Absolutely fantastic cameras that are still a little bit quirky and rare, but I think are super cool. Let's start with one that I actually sold early this year, so I don't have it in my collection anymore, which is painful to say, but I can't keep everything. I'm not a museum. And that's the Mamiya ZD. This was released in 2006 and was the first medium format DSLR all-in-one camera ever made. It had a 22 megapixel, huge Dalsa-made CCD sensor. And beyond being a historic first, it's just a fantastic camera and such an interesting camera to look at. It looks like a normal DSLR, just party size. Every dimension is increased. There's some interesting design choices on it, like the LCD display screen up at the top for settings is rounded. I loved having this camera. It pains me that I got rid of it because it is quite difficult to find. Supposedly less than 2,000 were ever made, and they were sold mostly outside of the US. So yeah, finding one can be kind of difficult. And if you do, the price is all over the place. I was able to get mine for under $1,000, but you could clearly pay up to $2,500 for one. Next up, we have our second Kodak on the list, but you'd be forgiven if you looked at it and didn't realize it was a Kodak. This is the Kodak DCS 760 released back in 2001. It's a 6 megapixel APS-H size sensor, so that's bigger than APS-C size sensors, but smaller than full frame. That kind of puts it in its own category of itself. There's not that many APS-H sensor cameras out there ever made. And that sensor was made by Kodak, which is also cool because later then they started using other people's sensors. But just looking at it, obviously what makes this camera cool and unique is that it's such a Frankenstein's monster of a camera. You have the Kodak's guts on the back and on the bottom merged into the body of a Nikon F5. So much so is it the exact body of a Nikon F5 that you still have the F5 marking over here. They say that back when Kodak was making their first DSLRs, they were putting digital guts into Nikon cameras kind of to prototype it out. but without really getting Nikon's official approval. And then they were selling them. And somewhere in the line, and I don't know what's truth and what's not, they finally ended up agreeing with each other that they should, like work together officially. But even with that official integration, it's so funny to see how many of these parts were just made for the Nikon F5 and then sent over and they used it. But it's not just the aesthetics, it's actually function. And there's one very cool function that comes with the Nikon F5 that you get here in this body. And that is that you can change the viewfinders. So like the Nikon F5 camera, because this is a Nikon F5 camera, the viewfinder up at the top comes off and you can swap with a handful of other viewfinders that are compatible with this camera. I bought the waist level finder because of course you got to do that. And it's just so interesting to use that kind of film tech, but in the digital camera. And it's not a new digital camera, but it's still respectable, 6 megapixels. Those 6 megapixels will surprise you how good the images can look. The buttons and controls otherwise feel like a fairly modern DSLR. These can be very tough to find. There's an even rarer M version, DCS 760M, that stands for monochrome. It had a monochrome only sensor. My friend picked one up recently and was gracious enough to share some images that I'm showing here. You can check out his website. Extremely cool. But even just the plain model can be hard to find working, and hard to find the batteries, and battery charger is especially hard to find. And there's some interesting hacks out there people have developed for that, but very cool camera. This is the second most modern camera on this list, and that is the Pentax Q7, released in 2013. Now the Pentax Q7 itself is not extremely rare, but what is rare is that it came in 120 different color combinations that could be custom ordered. Both the body of the camera and the camera fake rubber grip could be in 2 different colors, and then you could combine all those colors together for 120 different color combinations. Only a handful of these colors were ever sold like to retailers. The other ones you had to custom order through Japan when they were available. So now that they're obviously not available anymore, that makes some of these color combinations extremely rare. I was able to get this one that I'm calling Miami Vice, or like Malibu Barbie. I was able to get this one. I think it looks awesome. It's just the wildest color combination. And I feel extremely fortunate I was able to do that without paying an extremely high price tag. But I'm getting ahead of myself because the camera itself is actually pretty cool. And the other color combos are not quite as rare, and you could pick one up. It is one of the smallest interchangeable lens camera systems that you can buy. A teeny tiny 12 megapixel sensor in this camera, a couple of lenses in the lens system to go with it, fairly respectable. Actually really good image quality, so this could be your daily driver camera, everyday carry camera, and I think you'd be happy with it. And then of course, one of my favorite parts is that ridiculous flash. It's so cool. 2 cameras left, and I saved the best for last. This next one is an absolute legend of a camera, and that is the Epson RD1 digital rangefinder. This camera is so cool and quirky in so many different ways, but then also, unlike a lot of those other cameras, is actually kind of a perfect camera. This camera was released in 2004 by Epson. Yeah, the printer company. They also made cameras as well. The body was built by Cosina and it was based on the Voigtlander Bessa R camera, which you can see a lot of similarities here. This was the first digital rangefinder camera, so they even beat Leica to that. And it's just a beautiful camera, beautifully built camera. So you got a nice optical rangefinder there. That it's a real rangefinder. On the back, you have an LCD screen, but it can be flipped back, so you can hide the LCD screen and shoot this entirely without the screen. There's no live view, so the screen is just for changing settings anyway. And then up at the top, you have some really unique features. One of them is the dial gauge system that you have for settings. So it uses physical gauges that tell you the battery life, how many shots you have left in your SD card. You can also see white balance and then the image quality you're shooting in, if it's high, normal, or raw. And it's very cool to see this camera boot up and those gauges start to move. When you start changing settings and stuff, they start moving. I love that analog, like actually tactile, physical interaction you have with the settings there. Very few other cameras ever did that. I can count like 3 or 4 that have ever done that, including this camera. Also up here, you have a shutter winder, which the interesting part here is that this is actually winding the shutter. It's not just for fun, like the Fujifilm X-Half did, just completely unnecessarily. This actually winds the shutter, so it's functional and cool. So you can find these. They're not super, super rare, but they're just expensive and it's hard to justify it, but what an amazing camera. And now we move on to the one-of-a-kind category, which I only have one camera in this list because it truly is one of a kind. It might actually be the only one in the world, potentially. And that is this Pentax K1 transparent demo model. This camera was made in 2016 or thereabouts when the Pentax K1 was released. And there's photos of this online at photo conventions like CP Plus or whatever that's called, helping to demo and showcase and announce the new Pentax K1 back in 2016. But what makes this camera really special? Well, two things. One, technically, is because it actually is fully functioning. I've not been able to find anything on this camera that doesn't work like a normal Pentax K1. The other reason is just sentimental. I love the Pentax K1. That was my first kind of more professional camera that I bought, first full frame camera that I bought. And that's kind of the beauty of cameras. They don't have to be rare or expensive or quirky. They can just be your favorite camera, a normal camera that you love. Thanks for joining me today. And until next time, as always, happy snapping.